The first explosion rattled the windows of Shadow Point's mess hall as Emma Coleman slid a tray of biscuits into the industrial oven. 5:30 in the morning, the desert air still cool outside the concrete walls of the Arizona military base. Emma glanced at the clock, her movements calm despite the tremor that had just passed through the building. Not scheduled ordnance disposal. Not a training exercise. Wrong sound pattern. Wrong time. 15 seconds passed. Then another blast shook the foundation. Closer this time. Emma continued working outwardly undisturbed as she cracked eggs into a large metal bowl. Her practiced hands never stopped moving while her ears tracked the wail of alarms now starting across the compound. Years of muscle memory kept her appearing normal, even as her mind calculated trajectories, blast patterns, and response times. At the third explosion, Captain Reed burst into the kitchen, his face tight with tension. Base is under attack. All non-essential personnel to shelter immediately. Emma simply nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. I'll secure the kitchen. Reed was already gone racing toward the command center. Emma waited 3 seconds until his footsteps faded. Then she moved with sudden purpose toward the industrial freezer in the corner of the kitchen. Her movements now held nothing of the unassuming cook who had served Navy SEAL Team 315 for the past 3 years. She released a hidden latch beneath the freezer, revealing a small waterproof case. From it, she withdrew a Beretta M9, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency before tucking it into her waistband at the small of her back. Through the window, she spotted movement. 3 figures in tactical gear advancing through the smoke. Not American operators. Their movement patterns were wrong. Russian training. She recognized the distinctive Spetsnaz room-clearing formation. The kitchen door burst open. Emma had her back turned, seemingly busy covering food containers as any good cook would during an emergency. Don't move, came the accented voice. Emma raised her hands, slowly turning with practiced caution. The man wore a balaclava, but his eyes widened in visible shock when they locked on her face. Blackbird. The name emerged as an astonished whisper. Impossible. You died in Damascus. Emma dropped her raised hands with snake-like speed, drawing her concealed Beretta and firing in one fluid motion. The intruder crashed backward against the wall, tranquilizer dart protruding from his neck weapon, unfired. He slid to the floor, eyes still fixed on her face with stunned recognition. The unassuming cook who had laid out breakfast at 0600 every morning for 3 years was gone. In her place stood a ghost from America's darkest operations, someone who had supposedly died half a world away. Emma Coleman looked down at the unconscious man, her face betraying nothing as she whispered, "Not everyone who disappears is dead." Shadow Point rose from the Arizona desert like a concrete monument to Cold War paranoia. Built in 1982 during the Reagan military expansion, the facility had survived multiple rounds of base closures due to its remote location and specialized training facilities. Nestled among rocky outcroppings 60 miles from the nearest town, it had become the perfect home for Navy SEAL Team 315, one of America's premier counterterrorism units. For 3 years, Emma Coleman had arrived at 0430 each morning to begin breakfast preparations. Most days found her chopping vegetables before sunrise, her movements methodical and precise. At 29, she presented the picture of unremarkable efficiency. Brown hair always captured in a hairnet uniform, clean but not pressed demeanor pleasant, but never memorable. Morning, Mama. The SEALs would greet her as they filed through the chow line. She'd earned the nickname despite being younger than most of them. Something about her steadiness, the way she ensured they always had hot food waiting after brutal training sessions in the desert. Commander Michael Harrison led SEAL Team 315 with a quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. At 38, he carried the weight of 15 years in special operations, including 4 tours in Afghanistan and 3 in Iraq. His chest bore 3 silver stars, though he never spoke of how he earned them. The team's second-in-command, Lieutenant Carlos Reyes, possessed different qualities. At 36, the former Army Ranger had transferred to the Navy seeking greater challenges. His tracker skills were legendary, his attention to detail unmatched. It was Reyes who first noticed something unusual about their cook. "Ever watch how Coleman moves when she thinks no one is looking?" he'd asked Harrison one night over bourbon. Harrison had shrugged. "She's a cook, Carlos. A cook who always knows where every exit is, who never puts her back to a door, who scans sight lines like someone expecting trouble. Maybe she had a rough past. Harrison had replied, dismissing the observation. Not everyone working support chose that path. But Reyes had continued watching, noting how Emma maintained awareness of her surroundings with the unconscious vigilance of someone with combat experience. The one person who paid Emma the most attention was Master Sergeant James Wilson. At 65, Wilson had officially retired from service years ago, but remained at Shadow Point as a senior advisor. His weathered face told the story of decades in America's most classified operations, from Cold War Berlin to the mountains of Afghanistan. Wilson observed Emma with the patience of a man who had spent years watching for threats that others missed. Wilson had recognized something in Emma the moment she arrived at Shadow Point, something in her eyes, the thousand-yard stare that never truly fades. He had served long enough to know that some of America's most elite warriors sometimes walked away from combat seeking quieter roles where the weight of life and death decisions no longer rested on their shoulders. Wilson respected her choice to step back, whatever her reasons, and never pried into her past. Each morning, Emma prepared food with the same focus with which she had once prepared for combat operations. The mess hall under her supervision ran with military precision. Breakfast at 0600, lunch at 1200, dinner at 1800. Between meals, she cleaned and organized with meticulous care. What no one except Wilson suspected was that Emma's daily routine included much more than food service. Every morning after breakfast preparation, she conducted a personal security assessment of the entire base perimeter. She tracked personnel movements, noting deviations from standard patterns. She memorized guard rotations and security protocols. Every night, she practiced weapons drills in the privacy of her quarters, maintaining skills she had promised herself she would never need again. The nightmare always began the same way. Dust swirling through shafts of sunlight in an abandoned apartment. The smell of cardamom and gunpowder. Emma positioned at a window, M40A1 sniper rifle balanced on a folded jacket. 21 years old, the youngest member of Operation Blackbird, a classified program so secret that fewer than 15 people in the Pentagon knew of its existence. May 1991. The Gulf War had officially ended, but America's shadow operations continued throughout the Middle East. The Blackbird program represented a radical experiment, female operators deployed for specialized assassination missions in regions where male operators faced heightened scrutiny. Emma had been recruited directly from Ranger School, where she had graduated top of her class despite being one of the first women admitted to the program. Her marksmanship scores had broken records. Her psychological evaluations showed unusual compartmentalization abilities. Perfect for wet work. Damascus had been her fifth mission. The target, a terrorist financier responsible for bombings that had killed American diplomats. Intelligence indicated he would attend a meeting in a residential area, appearing briefly in the window of a third-floor apartment. A shot requiring extreme precision authorized at the highest levels. Emma had spent 30 hours in position, barely moving, measuring wind patterns, and memorizing the rhythms of the neighborhood. When the moment came, she had the perfect sight picture. Crosshairs centered on the window where her target would appear. But when the curtain moved, it wasn't the financier who appeared. It was a boy no older than 14. Dark hair, solemn eyes. He stood at the window looking out at the city. "Target has human shield," Emma had whispered into her communication device. Young male, approximately 14 years, seeking guidance. The response came immediately from her handler, Colonel Richard Thomas, stationed in the safe house 2 blocks away. "Confirmed intelligence indicates target has no children. This must be a nephew or unrelated youth. Proceed with operation." Emma had hesitated, finger resting beside the trigger guard. Requesting visual confirmation of target. Negative, Blackbird. Window of opportunity closing. Execute now. As Emma watched, an older man appeared behind the boy, resting hands on his shoulders. The face matched her target photos. The financier. But the way he stood with the boy wasn't the stance of someone using a human shield. It was protective. Paternal. "Target acquired, Wham," she had reported, feeling cold certainty settle into her bones. But intelligence was wrong. The boy is his son. A long pause followed. "Confirmation received about family status." Her handler finally responded, voice tight. "But mission parameters unchanged. National security priority. Execute." Emma had taken a slow breath, easing her finger onto the trigger. In that moment, she made a decision that would haunt her dreams for years to come. She adjusted her aim by 2 centimeters, ensuring the bullet would pass through her target's head in a way that would drop him backward away from the boy, a modification that provided the child the highest chance of survival, though it increased her own risk of mission failure. The shot echoed across Damascus. Through her scope, Emma watched the terrorist fall. The boy turned, screamed. Neighbors would arrive momentarily. Extraction needed to happen now. Emma disassembled her rifle with practiced speed, stowing it in an unassuming gym bag. She had reached the street when her encrypted radio crackled. Blackbird mission compromised. Extraction canceled. You are disavowed. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Disavowed. The ultimate nightmare for any covert operator. No support, no extraction, no acknowledgement if captured or killed. For 6 days, Emma had evaded Syrian security forces utilizing every skill she'd been taught. She crossed into Turkey by hiding beneath a produce truck, made contact with a sleeper agent in Ankara, and eventually secured unofficial passage to a NATO base. Throughout the journey, she received no communication from her handlers. Operation Blackbird had vanished from official records, its operators abandoned. Upon returning to American soil, she discovered the truth. The Damascus mission had been politically compromised. The terrorist financier had secret connections to Allied intelligence services. When those connections were discovered after his death, the Pentagon disavowed all knowledge of the operation. Colonel Thomas, her handler, had been killed in a training accident 3 days after Emma's extraction was canceled. Emma had been given a choice: accept an honorable discharge with full benefits and remain silent forever, or face prosecution for an unauthorized operation on foreign soil. She chose silence and freedom, walking away from the career she had sacrificed everything to build. But the nightmares remained. The boy's face at the window, the moment of the shot, the betrayal by the country she had sworn to serve. Night after night, Emma relived Damascus, wondering if she had made the right choice in taking the shot, wondering what had happened to the boy who had witnessed his father's assassination. Those questions led her to request reassignment to food service at a remote military base, a place where she could still serve without having to decide who lived and who died. For 3 years, that arrangement had worked perfectly, until today. Master Sergeant Wilson first approached Emma 6 months after she arrived at Shadow Point. He found her in the mess hall late one evening, meticulously organizing supplies for the next morning. "Your chicken pot pie recipe," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "reminds me of the one they used to serve at Camp Alpha in Berlin, back in '83. Emma had tensed slightly, though her hands continued working. "Just a standard military recipe, Sergeant Wilson. Call me James." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "And we both know there's nothing standard about you, Staff Sergeant Coleman." Her hands finally stopped moving. She turned slowly to face him. "I haven't held that rank in years." "And once a warrior, always a warrior," Wilson replied, "though we sometimes choose different battlefields." That conversation had marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Wilson never asked directly about her past, but he shared stories from his own. Cold War operations behind the Iron Curtain, surveillance missions in East Berlin, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the chaos that followed as former Soviet assets scattered across Europe. Wilson had served in the Army Special Forces during the height of the Cold War, conducting operations so classified that most remained unreleased 30 years later. Like Emma, he had stepped back from direct combat, though in his case the decision came after decades of service rather than a single traumatic mission. "You ever miss it?" Emma asked him one night as they sat outside the mess hall watching the desert stars. The operational tempo, the adrenaline. Wilson considered the question. "Sometimes, but not the weight of it, not the decisions." "What decisions?" "The ones that haunt you at night," he said simply. "The ones where every choice is wrong, but you still have to make one." Emma had fallen silent, recognizing the understanding in his eyes. Wilson knew what it meant to carry impossible choices. His weathered face showed the map of a life spent in service, much of it in darkness. Over time, Wilson became something between a mentor and a father figure to Emma. He helped her maintain her skills discreetly, arranging for them to inspect the shooting range during off hours. He shared techniques for staying sharp without attracting attention. Most importantly, he provided the one thing Emma had lacked since Damascus: someone who understood the burden she carried. "War doesn't end for the soldier," Wilson told her once. "It just changes location, moves from the battlefield into the mind." Emma found comfort in his philosophical approach to their shared profession. Wilson had somehow made peace with his past without forgetting it. She hoped someday to achieve the same balance. Their conversations often turned to the changing nature of warfare. Wilson had operated during the height of the Cold War, when adversaries were clearly defined and objectives were straightforward if morally complex. Emma had served in the murkier post-Soviet world, where enemies hid among civilians and victory could never be clearly measured. Harder for your generation, Wilson observed. We knew who the enemy was, wore different uniforms, flew different flags. You folks have to figure it out on the fly often when it's too late. These conversations helped Emma process her experiences, placing them in the broader context of America's evolving military challenges. Through Wilson's perspective, she began to see her Damascus mission not as a personal failure, but as part of a systemic problem in how covert operations were managed in the post-Cold War era. Wilson never pushed Emma to return to combat roles, understanding her need for distance from those decisions. But he did encourage her to stay prepared just in case. That preparation would prove vital sooner than either expected. Emma first noticed the irregularities 3 weeks before the attack. Small things easily dismissed individually. A perimeter sensor temporarily offline during scheduled maintenance that remained down 17 minutes longer than protocol allowed. A supply truck arriving 40 minutes early with a driver she didn't recognize. Communications equipment experiencing brief outages blamed on desert dust. At 04:30 one morning, Emma was conducting her usual perimeter check when she spotted Lieutenant Reyes watching her from the shadow of a storage building. She continued her inspection as though checking exterior kitchen vents, but she knew he had seen enough to question her activities. Later that day, Reyes approached her in the mess hall after lunch service. "Interesting hobby you have, Coleman," he said casually. "Checking perimeter security before sunrise." Emma wiped her hands on a dish towel. "I like watching the desert wake up. Helps me plan the day's menu based on the weather." Reyes studied her with the penetrating gaze that had made him such an effective tracker. "Must be why you always inspect the north fence line on Tuesdays and the west approach on Thursdays." "Creatures of habit," Emma replied evenly. "Everyone needs a routine." "Including infiltration teams," Reyes noted. "They establish patterns too." The comment hung between them, heavy with implication. Emma realized Reyes had been conducting his own surveillance of the base, perhaps noticing the same irregularities she had detected. "If I were worried about infiltration," she said carefully, "I might pay attention to the southeast corner. Poor camera coverage there, blind spot in the motion detection grid." Reyes nodded slowly. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." Of course. They reached an unspoken understanding in that moment. Two operators recognizing each other without acknowledging their true capabilities. After that conversation, Emma occasionally found small notes from Reyes about security anomalies he had observed. She in turn would leave observations about unusual vehicles or personnel near areas where Team 315 trained. As the irregularities increased, Emma decided to share her concerns with Wilson. They met in the base's small library, a room rarely used by the action-oriented SEALs. "Someone's preparing for something," she told him, voice low despite the empty room. "Systematic probing of defenses, communications mapping, personnel pattern analysis." Wilson listened, his weathered face grave. "Professional job. Very. State-level resources, military precision." "Russians," Emma considered. "Possibly. The methodology matches FSB protocols, but there are differences. Could be former KGB now working private." "Mercenaries, Barbara," Wilson suggested. "Hired by someone with a grudge against Team 315. Or someone interested in their upcoming mission," Emma added. Wilson's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about their mission?" "Nothing officially," Emma admitted, "but Commander Harrison has been reviewing satellite imagery of the Kazakhstan border region. Lieutenant Reyes requisitioned language guides for Russian and Chechen dialects. They're preparing for something in former Soviet territory." "You should tell Harrison what you've observed," Wilson advised. "He needs to know the base security may be compromised." Emma shook her head. "And explain how a cook noticed these patterns. How I recognized FSB infiltration techniques." "I can't expose myself, James." Wilson understood her reluctance. Emma had built a new life, one that kept her safely distanced from her past. Revealing her true capabilities would raise questions she couldn't answer without exposing classified operations the government had officially denied. "At least give him something," Wilson pressed. "A warning, however vague." Emma agreed reluctantly. The next morning, she approached Commander Harrison as he collected his breakfast. "Sir," she said quietly, "I've noticed some unusual activity around the perimeter during my morning walks. Might be nothing, but I thought you should know." Harrison regarded her with mild surprise. "What kind of activity, Coleman?" "Sensor disruptions, unfamiliar vehicles, small things but consistent." The commander's expression shifted to one of patronizing patience. "I appreciate your vigilance, but we have professionals monitoring our security. Perhaps focus on your culinary duties." The dismissal stung, though Emma had expected it. To Harrison, she was just the cook, her observations easily dismissed as the overactive imagination of support personnel playing at security work. That evening, Emma made a disturbing discovery while cleaning the team's planning room after a strategy session. Beneath the central table, almost invisible, unless specifically searching for it, she found a listening device. Not modern American or Chinese technology, but an analog Soviet design from the 1980s, modified with contemporary components. An elegant marriage of Cold War reliability and modern capability, virtually undetectable by standard sweeps due to its unusual frequency range. The presence of such sophisticated surveillance equipment confirmed Emma's worst fears. Someone with significant resources and intimate knowledge of American security protocols had thoroughly penetrated Shadow Point. Team 315 was compromised, possibly moments away from walking into a trap of some kind. With this evidence, Emma decided to risk approaching Harrison again, this time with Wilson as backup to lend credibility to her concerns. But before she could arrange the meeting, events accelerated beyond her control. Commander Michael Harrison first truly noticed Emma Coleman 6 months after her arrival at Shadow Point. Not as the efficient cook who managed their meals, but as a woman with unexpected depth. He had been working late, reviewing mission parameters, and found her reading Sun Tzu's Art of War in the empty mess hall. "Interesting choice for bedtime reading," he had commented. Emma had closed the book calmly. History major in college. Old habit. Something about her composure intrigued him. Most support personnel grew nervous or overly familiar when senior operators engaged them directly. Emma showed neither reaction, maintaining a professional distance that somehow didn't feel cold. Over the subsequent months, Harrison occasionally sought her company during late nights at the base. Their conversations remained largely impersonal at first. Base operations, desert weather, the challenges of maintaining morale among elite warriors between high-stakes missions. Gradually, Harrison began sharing more personal reflections. The weight of command, the responsibility of sending men into danger, the frustration of political constraints on military operations. Emma listened with an understanding that went beyond sympathy, occasionally offering insights that suggested deeper knowledge than her position would indicate. "Lost a team in Kandahar," he told her once, the admission emerging after midnight when the base stood silent. "Intelligence failure. Someone leaked our insertion point." Emma had nodded, her eyes showing recognition of the particular pain that accompanied betrayal rather than simple combat loss. "What happened to the leak?" she asked. Harrison had looked at her sharply, surprised by the question. Not "how terrible" or "I'm sorry for your loss," but a tactical inquiry about counterintelligence response. Unexpected from a cook. "Never found them," he admitted. "Investigations stalled at the regional command level." Emma nodded again, saying nothing but somehow conveying understanding of the frustration such an outcome would generate. Her reaction further cemented Harrison's sense that there was more to Emma Coleman than appeared on her personnel file. 2 nights before the attack on Shadow Point, Harrison found Emma alone in the mess hall, preparing bread dough for the next morning. He watched her methodical movements for a moment before speaking. "We're heading out tomorrow, classified operation." Emma continued kneading dough, her rhythm unbroken. "I'll pack field rations for your team." "Not necessary," Harrison replied. "Quick insertion and extraction. We'll be back for dinner." Her hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their work. "What's the mission?" Harrison hesitated. Sharing operational details with support personnel violated protocol. Yet something compelled him to continue. "Capture of a high-value target, former KGB officer turned arms dealer. Intelligence says he'll be at a location near the Kazakhstan border for 12 hours. Small window, but clean extraction." Emma's expression remained neutral, but Harrison noticed her shoulders tense slightly. "This former KGB," she asked casually, "does he have a name? Mikhail Volkov, codenamed the Ghost? Earned it by disappearing for years at a time, then resurfacing to broker weapons deals between former Soviet republics and terrorist organizations. The color drained from Emma's face so quickly that Harrison stepped forward in concern. "Coleman, you okay?" Emma recovered quickly, turning toward the sink to wash flour from her hands. "Just tired. Long day." "Do you know that name?" Harrison stated rather than asked. Emma dried her hands methodically, buying time. "History major, remember Volkov was mentioned in some of my Cold War studies." "Dangerous man." Harrison studied her, unconvinced by the explanation, but unwilling to press further. "We'll handle him." "Be careful," Emma said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in their conversation. "The mission may not be what you think it is." "Meaning just a feeling," she replied, breaking eye contact. "Sometimes things aren't as straightforward as the briefing suggests." Harrison left the kitchen unsettled by the exchange. Emma's warning, vague as it was, carried the weight of genuine concern. Combined with her unlikely knowledge of a supposedly obscure Soviet operative, it raised questions about her background that Harrison had never seriously considered before. He spent that night reviewing mission parameters with greater scrutiny, searching for potential complications or intelligence gaps. Finding nothing obvious, he proceeded with preparations while instructing Lieutenant Reyes to maintain heightened awareness during the operation. Neither man could have predicted that their target was not only expecting them, but had already set in motion a plan that would bring the war directly to Shadow Point. A plan somehow connected to the quiet woman who had been serving their meals for 3 years. The night before Team 315 departed, Emma stood at her quarters window, watching the desert stars while making the most difficult decision of her life since Damascus. Tell Harrison everything, exposing herself to questions she couldn't legally answer, or remain silent and risk the lives of men she had come to respect and care for. In the end, she compromised, writing a detailed warning about potential security breaches and surveillance equipment with specific recommendations for counter-surveillance measures. She slipped the note under Harrison's door at 0300, knowing he would review all materials before the mission briefing at 0500. Whether he would take the warning seriously coming from his cook remained to be seen. Emma returned to her quarters and began preparations of her own, removing weapons and equipment from their hiding places. If her suspicions proved correct, Shadow Point would need every defender it could muster in the coming days, regardless of their official role. The mission to capture Mikhail Volkov, the Ghost, was about to trigger consequences no one at Shadow Point could fully anticipate. Consequences tied to a mission in Damascus that the American government had officially denied ever happened. A mission that had left a boy fatherless and created an enemy who had spent years preparing his revenge. Emma Coleman, once known as Blackbird, was about to face her past in the most direct and dangerous way possible. The cook was preparing to become a weapon once more, whether she wanted to or not. The nightmares that had haunted her sleep were about to manifest in the waking world of Shadow Point, Arizona. 18 hours before the first explosion, ROK's Shadow Point SEAL Team 315 gathered in the base's secure briefing room. The windowless concrete chamber hummed with the quiet professionalism of men preparing for combat. Commander Michael Harrison stood before a digital map display, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of satellite imagery showing a remote compound in the mountains bordering Kazakhstan. "Gentlemen, Operation Phantom Capture is a go for Euro 200 tomorrow." The room fell silent as Harrison outlined their mission parameters. Their target was Mikhail Volkov, former KGB officer turned international arms dealer, a ghost from the Cold War, who had mastered the art of disappearance. Intelligence placed him at the compound for a 12-hour window meeting with representatives from 3 terrorist organizations to broker a sale of Soviet-era nuclear material. Volkov earned his codename The Ghost during the Cold War by vanishing for years between operations. Harrison explained, bringing up a grainy photograph of a stern-faced man with ice-blue eyes. After the Soviet collapse, he went private, using his KGB connections to access abandoned military stockpiles. For 30 years, he's been selling death to the highest bidder, always one step ahead of capture. Lieutenant Carlos Reyes, studying the compound schematics with his characteristic intensity, asked the question on everyone's mind. "Why now? If this guy's been a ghost for 3 decades, what changed?" Harrison nodded toward the intelligence officer present from Langley. 3 weeks ago, one of our deep cover assets in Chechnya spotted Volkov meeting with former associates. The asset managed to place a tracking device on Volkov's vehicle. This is the first actionable intelligence we've had on his whereabouts in 15 years. The team spent the next hour reviewing tactical approaches, extraction plans, and contingencies. Harrison emphasized the capture requirement. Volkov is not a kill target. The intelligence he possesses about Soviet-era weapons caches and sleeper networks is too valuable. We take him alive. As the briefing concluded, Harrison felt a familiar tension settle between his shoulder blades. The mission parameters were clean, the intelligence fresh, the team ready. Yet something nagged at him. Perhaps it was the cook's strange reaction the previous night, or the warning note he'd found under his door that morning detailing potential security breaches with a precision that seemed impossible from kitchen staff. Harrison had dismissed the warning initially, but something about its specificity troubled him. He'd asked Reyes to conduct an additional communications security sweep before departure, which had turned up nothing unusual. Still, the commander instructed his team to maintain enhanced counter-surveillance protocols during the operation. One final note, Harrison added as his men prepared to gear up. We've received unconfirmed reports of potential security breaches on base. While this mission remains compartmentalized, exercise additional caution in all communications. No mission details over standard channels. The team acknowledged the warning with professional nods. These men had operated in environments where betrayal was always a possibility. Enhanced security was simply another variable to manage. What none of them realized was that their target had anticipated their every move weeks before the mission was even conceived. While SEAL Team 315 prepared for deployment, Emma Coleman moved through the base's kitchen with practiced calm, preparing dinner for the remaining base personnel. Her hands worked automatically chopping vegetables and seasoning meat, while her mind processed what she had learned from the fragments of conversation overheard in the officers' dining room. Mikhail Volkov. The name had struck her like a physical blow when Harrison mentioned it. Not just any former KGB officer, but the father of the boy in the Damascus window. The man whose death she had falsely confirmed in her mission report, allowing him to disappear and reinvent himself. The man who now, according to intelligence, had spent years tracking the operators involved in the Damascus mission. When the kitchen emptied after dinner service, Emma moved to the industrial freezer and released the hidden latch again. This time she removed not just the Beretta, but a larger waterproof case containing a disassembled M24 sniper rifle, the weapon that had once been the signature tool of Blackbird operations. Her fingers traced the familiar contours of the stock as memories flooded back, the weight of it against her shoulder, the focus required to make impossible shots, the lives she had taken through its precision. Thought you might be checking your insurance policy tonight. Emma spun toward the voice hand, instinctively reaching for the Beretta. Master Sergeant Wilson stood in the doorway, his aged frame silhouetted against the light from the dining hall. You knew, she said simply. Wilson stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Known since you arrived, the way you move, the way you observe, the darkness behind your eyes. Same darkness I've seen in every operator who's made the hard calls. How much do you know about me? Enough to recognize Blackbird when I see her, Wilson replied. The rest is your business until you decide otherwise. Emma studied the old soldier, weighing her next words carefully. They're going after Volkov. I heard. It's a trap, Emma stated flatly. Volkov survived Damascus. He spent years hunting everyone involved in the operation that killed his son. Son, Wilson's eyebrows raised slightly. The official file on Volkov never mentioned a son. There is no official file on what happened in Damascus, Emma responded, bitterness edging her voice. The entire operation was disavowed. Blackbird never existed. Wilson moved further into the kitchen, his eyes on the sniper rifle components laid out with military precision on the prep table. You planning to stop them from leaving? Emma shook her head. Too late for that, but I can prepare for what's coming. And what exactly is coming, Staff Sergeant Coleman? War, Emma answered simply. Volkov isn't meeting terrorists to sell weapons. He's gathering allies to strike at the heart of America's special operations capability. This base, this team, they're the target, have been all along. Wilson absorbed this information with the calm calculation of a veteran strategist. You need to tell Harrison. I tried to warn him. He dismissed it as Cook's paranoia. Try again, with me backing your assessment. Emma closed the rifle case reluctantly and explained how I know Volkov's true intentions, how I recognize the infiltration tactics being used against this base. I can't reveal Blackbird without exposing classified operations that officially never happened. Wilson considered this dilemma, then offered a solution born from decades of clandestine warfare. Then we prepare our own countermeasures. If Volkov is coming for this base, we'll be ready without compromising your cover. Together, they began forming a defense strategy that drew on both Cold War tradecraft and modern tactical approaches. Wilson's experience in Berlin operations provided insights into Russian methodology, while Emma's recent training allowed them to anticipate modern adaptations. Neither realized that the attack would come sooner than they had predicted, or that their preparation time had already run out. The Black Sea churned beneath a moonless sky as Emma stared through night vision goggles at the Ukrainian coastline. December 1991, 1 month after the official dissolution of the Soviet Union. While the world celebrated the end of the Cold War, a new kind of warfare was being born in the chaotic aftermath. Emma Coleman, callsign Blackbird, perched in the observer's nest of an unmarked patrol boat, tracking the movements of former KGB officers now selling Soviet military secrets to the highest bidders. At 21, she represented the future of covert operations, operators selected not for brute strength, but for adaptability intelligence, and the ability to move undetected through environments where traditional male operators faced heightened scrutiny. Colonel Richard Thomas, the architect of the Blackbird program, stood beside her on the cramped observation deck. "Ukraine is just the beginning," he said, his breath fogging in the winter air. "The entire Soviet arsenal is up for grabs. Nuclear materials, chemical weapons, biological agents. The most dangerous garage sale in history." Emma adjusted her focus on a warehouse where former KGB Major Mikhail Volkov was reportedly meeting with Middle Eastern buyers, her first glimpse of the man who would later haunt her nightmares. "Why not just take them out now?" she asked. "Clean sweep while they're all gathered." Thomas shook his head. "Politicians want intelligence, not bodies. The Cold War endgame is about information, not elimination. We track these former assets, map their networks, and prepare detailed files for the day when the political winds shift." The operation lasted 3 weeks. Emma tracked Volkov's movements through the Black Sea ports, documenting his contacts, his methods, his security protocols. She learned his patterns, the way he moved, the distinctive security formation his personal guards maintained, knowledge that would later prove critical in Damascus. Most importantly, she witnessed firsthand Volkov's methodical approach to revenge. When a local crime boss attempted to cheat the former KGB officer, Volkov didn't simply kill the man. He systematically dismantled the criminal's entire organization over 7 days, targeting not just the leadership, but their families, their allies, their financial infrastructure. A comprehensive destruction that left nothing behind. "Remember what you're seeing," Colonel Thomas had told her as they observed the aftermath. "This is how the KGB elite were trained, not just to kill enemies, but to erase them completely. Volkov won't stop until there's nothing left to destroy." The memory of those words echoed through Emma's mind now, as she prepared for Volkov's inevitable assault on Shadow Point. If he was truly hunting Blackbird operators, he wouldn't be satisfied with the simple kill. He would want complete annihilation of everything and everyone connected to the Damascus operation. Her training had been conducted by the last generation of Cold Warriors men like Colonel Thomas, who understood the Soviet mindset intimately. They had taught her not just how to shoot, but how to think like her adversaries, to anticipate their strategies by understanding their psychological foundations. The Blackbird program itself had grown from the ashes of Cold War intelligence operations. As traditional military targets disappeared with the Soviet collapse, new threats emerged from the chaos. Rogue intelligence officers, military units operating without national oversight, nuclear materials vanishing from poorly secured facilities. Blackbird operators were America's scalpel in this new landscape, deployed individually rather than in teams capable of operating without infrastructure in regions where American military presence would create diplomatic incidents. Emma had been among the first waves selected for her marksmanship, her analytical capabilities, and her ability to blend into environments hostile to obvious American operatives. For 2 years, she had served with distinction, completing 7 high-priority eliminations without detection. Damascus should have been her 8th. Instead, it became the mission that ended Blackbird and sent her into self-imposed exile as a military cook. As Emma assembled her rifle in the Shadow Point kitchen, muscle memory brought back the precision drills Colonel Thomas had insisted upon, field stripping and reassembly while blindfolded, calculating wind adjustments without electronic aids, memorizing ballistic tables for different ammunition types and atmospheric conditions. Old school, Wilson commented, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. Thomas believed electronics could be compromised, Emma explained. He trained us to operate as though we were behind the Iron Curtain in the 1960s with nothing but our wits and basic equipment. Smart man, Wilson nodded. Same philosophy we used in Berlin operations. The more technology you depend on, the more failure points you create. Emma completed the assembly, checking the action with mechanical precision. This rifle got me through 7 operations before Damascus. Saved my life more than once. And now it might save all of us, Wilson observed grimly. The old sergeant wasn't wrong. As SEAL Team 315 boarded their helicopter for the mission to capture Volkov, the security of Shadow Point rested on the preparations of a cook and a retired operator, using techniques from a war that had officially ended decades ago. Midnight at Shadow Point arrived with an unnatural stillness. Even the desert creatures that normally serenaded the base with their nocturnal chorus had fallen silent, as though sensing the approaching violence. Emma and Wilson had spent the hours since dinner establishing an improvised security network around the base perimeter, using techniques developed during the Cold War for situations when standard electronic surveillance might be compromised. Thin filaments stretched across likely approach paths connected to improvised alarm systems, fashioned from kitchen timers and mess hall supplies. Pressure plates disguised as natural ground formations covered blind spots in the base's official security system. Most importantly, they had established observation posts with overlapping fields of view, allowing them to monitor the entire approach without electronic signatures that might be detected. Movement southeast ridge, Emma whispered into the handheld radio Wilson had provided from his personal collection. Old technology operating on frequencies modern systems rarely monitored. Confirmed, Wilson's voice crackled back. 2-man team carrying what looks like signal jammers. Emma adjusted her position slightly, bringing her night vision monocular to focus on the figures moving with professional discipline across the desert floor. Their approach pattern was methodical, designed to avoid standard motion detection grids. Russian training Spetsnaz or FSB, she assessed. But their equipment is mixed origin, contracted operators, not official military. Over the next hour, they identified 12 infiltrators establishing positions around Shadow Point, carefully avoiding the base's standard security measures while setting up equipment designed to neutralize communications and sensor networks. The pattern confirmed Emma's worst fears. This was no simple attack, but a carefully orchestrated operation months in the planning. They're establishing a signal intercept perimeter, Wilson noted after observing their equipment placement. Classic KGB tactic from the Berlin days. Isolate before infiltrate. Emma checked her watch. SEAL Team 315 had departed 4 hours earlier for their mission to capture Volkov. By now, they would be approaching their target unaware that the hunter had become the hunted. We need to warn Harrison, she decided, weighing operational security against the immediate threat. They're walking into an ambush. Wilson shook his head grimly. All communications in or out of this base are probably compromised already. Those signal jammers they've placed will block our secure channels, and using unsecured frequencies would just alert them that we've detected their presence. Before Emma could respond, her improvised perimeter alarm activated, a soft clicking sound indicating movement along the northwest approach, an area where they had identified only 2 infiltrators previously. We've got new players, she whispered, adjusting her position to observe the approach. Through her night vision, she counted 8 additional figures moving toward the base with military precision. Unlike the earlier infiltrators, these men carried heavier weapons and moved with the confidence of assault teams preparing for direct action. This is happening faster than we anticipated, Wilson observed. They're not waiting for the team to return. They're moving on the base now. Emma made a rapid strategic assessment. They must have a contingency plan if the team doesn't return on schedule. Attack the base, immediately eliminate potential reinforcements, and extract intelligence about other operations. As they watched, the infiltrators began systematically neutralizing Shadow Point's perimeter security systems, moving with the precision that comes from months of surveillance and planning. How many base personnel remain active? Emma asked. Skeleton crew, Wilson replied. Maybe 30 combat effective security forces plus support staff. Most of our heavy operators left with Team 315. Emma calculated the odds grimly. 20 infiltrators that they had identified, likely more in reserve, at attacking a base operating at minimum staffing levels. Worse, the attackers had spent months studying Shadowpoint's defenses and had already begun neutralizing its communication capabilities. We need to alert Captain Reed, she decided. Security protocols call for him to assume command in Harrison's absence. Wilson nodded agreement. I'll make contact. My position as senior advisor will let me access him without raising questions about why a cook is reporting tactical intelligence. As Wilson moved to contact base leadership, Emma continued monitoring the approaching assault teams. Their movements revealed sophisticated tactical awareness, with teams establishing overlapping fields of fire and systematically identifying and targeting the base's defensive strengths. Emma recognized the hallmarks of Volkov's methodical approach from her Black Sea observations years earlier. This wasn't just an attack. It was an erasure operation designed to eliminate everyone and everything connected to Shadowpoint. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the desert night. SEAL Team 315 had been lured away, deliberately separated from their support structure, and drawn into territory where Volkov controlled all variables. Meanwhile, the base itself was being systematically prepared for annihilation by professionals who had studied its every weakness. Emma checked her weapons again, the familiar ritual calming her racing thoughts. The Beretta M9 at her hip, loaded with standard ammunition rather than the tranquilizer rounds she had used on the first infiltrator. The M24 sniper rifle assembled and zeroed for Shadowpoint's elevation and climate conditions. A combat knife secured at her ankle, and 3 improvised explosive devices fashioned from kitchen chemicals and mechanical timers. Not the arsenal she would have chosen for defending against 20-plus professional operators, but it would have to suffice. Emma positioned herself at her selected Overwatch location, establishing fields of fire covering the most likely approach vectors to the base's command center. Wilson's voice crackled through her radio. Reed is mobilizing security forces, but he's skeptical about the scale of infiltration I've reported. Standard perimeter sensors show no breaches. Because they've been systematically disabled or looped, Emma responded. Classic penetration tactic. Did you tell him about the signal jammers? Affirmative. He's ordered communications personnel to verify network integrity, but that will take time we don't have. Emma adjusted her position slightly, tracking the nearest assault team as they approached the base's southeast entrance. They'll hit us within 20 minutes, she assessed. Tell Reed to focus defensive forces on protecting the command center and communications hub. Those will be primary objectives. As Wilson relayed this information, Emma noticed movement from an unexpected direction. A lone figure approached her position with deliberate stealth, using cover and concealment with professional skill. She shifted her rifle slightly, acquiring the potential threat in her scope finger, resting lightly beside the trigger guard. The figure paused, then made a deliberate hand signal. Military recognition protocol, not Russian, but American. Lieutenant Carlos Reyes emerged from the shadows, his expression grim in the moonlight. I thought you were with Team 315, Emma said quietly as he took cover beside her. Harrison sent me back when we detected surveillance on our approach, Reyes explained. I was 5 minutes from base when all communications went dark. What's our situation? Emma hesitated only briefly before abandoning her cover story. There was no time for maintaining deceptions. At least 20 professional operators establishing assault positions around the base perimeter. Signal jamming equipment already active. First strike likely within 15 minutes. If Reyes was surprised by the cook's tactical assessment, he didn't show it. Years of special operations had taught him to evaluate information based on its accuracy rather than its source. You've established observation posts, he asked, scanning the positions she had prepared with professional appreciation. Affirmative. Wilson is coordinating with Captain Reed to establish defensive positions, but base security is understaffed and unprepared for this level of infiltration. Reyes studied her for a moment, noting the sniper rifle, the communications equipment, the tactical positioning she had selected with obvious expertise. You want to tell me who you really are, Coleman? Later, Emma replied, focusing on the approaching threat. If we survive. Reyes accepted this with a nod. Fair enough. What's your assessment of their objective? Total elimination of base personnel and intelligence assets, led by Mikhail Volkov, former KGB, now pursuing a personal vendetta. Against SEAL Team 315, Reyes asked, confusion evident in his voice. Against me, Emma corrected grimly. Your team was just the bait to separate Shadow Point from its primary defensive capability. Before Reyes could process this revelation, the first explosion rocked the southeast perimeter. The assault had begun. The initial explosion targeted Shadow Point's backup generator system, plunging sections of the base into darkness as emergency lighting struggled to activate. Within seconds, two additional detonations struck the main communications array, and the vehicle depot calculated strikes designed to isolate and immobilize the base's defensive capabilities. Emma watched the pattern unfold with professional recognition. The attackers were following classic Russian doctrine, systematically eliminating command control and communication capabilities before engaging defensive forces directly. They're creating chaos before the main assault, she explained to Reyes as they observed the developing attack. Standard Spetsnaz methodology: disable infrastructure, disrupt command structure, then eliminate resistance in the confusion. Reyes nodded grimly, already calculating defensive options. We need to reach Captain Reed, establish a coherent defense. Negative, Emma countered. Reed will follow the standard protocol, consolidating forces around the command center. That's exactly where they'll expect resistance. You have an alternative, Emma indicated 3 positions she had identified across the base. Asymmetric defense: small teams at unexpected locations targeting their assault groups before they reach the command center. Hit and move tactics rather than static defense. Reyes studied her improvised tactical map with professional appreciation. This isn't your first combat operation. No, Emma admitted, but it might be my last if we don't move now. Together they made their way through Shadow Point's maintenance tunnels, a network of access corridors rarely used by base personnel, but familiar to Emma from her daily security assessments. These passageways provided covered movement between key positions without exposing them to the attackers' observed fields of fire. They encountered Wilson at their first rally point, the old sergeant having established a temporary command post in the base's water treatment facility. Reed's established defensive positions per protocol, Wilson reported. 20 security personnel barricaded in the command center, remainder deployed to secure the armory and communications backup systems. Exactly as they'll expect, Emma noted. Have you made contact with any other operators on base? 2 Force Recon Marines on temporary assignment, Wilson confirmed. They're establishing sniper positions overlooking the main approach. Reyes added his tactical assessment. Team 315 walked into an ambush. Harrison recognized the trap too late and sent me back to warn the base. The rest of the team was engaging hostile forces when I lost communications. The implications hung heavily in the small room. SEAL Team 315, America's premier counterterrorism unit, was potentially lost. Shadow Point, their home base, was under direct assault by professional operators, and the only defensive force consisted of base security personnel, 2 Marines, a lieutenant, a retired sergeant, and a cook with a mysterious past. We need to establish clear objectives, Emma stated, focusing the group on immediate priorities. What are we defending? Personnel, Reyes answered immediately. We evacuate non-combat staff to secure locations, protect our people first. Intelligence, Wilson added. The command center contains classified materials on multiple operations. We can't allow that to fall into enemy hands. Emma nodded agreement. And we need to restore communications with outside forces. Even if Team 315 is compromised, we need to alert command about what's happening here. With these priorities established, they formulated a 3-phase defense plan that played to their limited strengths while exploiting the attackers' expectations. Phase 1 outlined, Wilson coordinates with Reed to maintain the standard defensive posture, keeping the attackers focused on the command center approach. Meanwhile, Reyes continued, I'll lead the Marines in establishing counter-sniper positions here and here, creating crossfire zones covering the main avenues of approach. Phase 2, Emma went on. I access the auxiliary communication system in the water tower. It's old technology, Cold War-era equipment, maintained for emergencies but not listed in current base schematics. If Volkov's intelligence comes from recent sources, he may not know it exists. Wilson nodded appreciation for this insight. That system operates on frequencies modern jammers might not be configured to block. Once communications are established, Reyes added, We call in every available asset from Regional Command. Air support, QRF, everything they can send. Phase 3 depends on timing, Emma concluded. If reinforcements are inbound, we maintain defensive positions and focus on protecting personnel. If we're on our own, we transition to active countermeasures targeting their command and control elements directly. The plan represented their best chance given limited resources and overwhelming odds. What remained unspoken was the low probability of success against professional operators who had spent months planning this assault. As they prepared to move to their assigned positions, Reyes pulled Emma aside. "You know more about what's happening than you're saying," he stated rather than asked. "This isn't just about Shadow Point or Team 315. Emma met his gaze steadily. "No, it's not. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is keeping our people alive and denying Volkov his objective." "And what exactly is his objective?" Reyes pressed. "Me," Emma answered simply. "He wants Blackbird. Everything else is collateral damage in his pursuit of revenge." Before Reyes could demand further explanation, automatic weapons fire erupted from the direction of the command center. The main assault had begun. Emma checked her weapons one final time. "We're out of time. Execute the plan. If we survive, I'll explain everything." They separated, moving to their assigned positions as Shadow Point erupted into full-scale combat. Emma made her way toward the water tower using the confusion of the initial assault as cover for her movement. Her mind processed tactical information, automatically identifying attack patterns and adjusting her route accordingly. The base's defensive forces were performing better than expected, maintaining disciplined fire and established perimeters despite the chaos. Captain Reed, whatever his initial skepticism, had organized a coherent response to the attack. It wouldn't be enough against the force Volkov had assembled, but it bought precious minutes for the alternative defense plan to activate. Emma reached the water tower access ladder, scanning for observers before beginning her climb. The auxiliary communications system had been installed during the Cold War, a backup designed to function even if the main base systems were destroyed by Soviet attack. Maintained more from institutional inertia than tactical necessity, the equipment was checked quarterly, but rarely used in modern operations. As she climbed, Emma's thoughts returned to her Damascus mission, to the boy in the window, to Mikhail Volkov, the man she had been sent to eliminate, but who had instead survived to become her most dedicated hunter. The pattern became clear in retrospect. Volkov had spent years tracking down everyone connected to the Damascus operation, systematically eliminating the operators who had taken his son's life. Now he had created an elaborate trap using SEAL Team 315 as bait to draw out the one Blackbird operative he hadn't been able to locate. The coincidence of Team 315 being assigned to capture him was too perfect. Someone with access to American intelligence and special operations planning had been feeding Volkov information, allowing him to stay one step ahead while preparing his revenge. Emma reached the communications equipment, an analog system designed to operate on frequencies rarely monitored by modern electronic warfare systems. She activated the power supply and began the startup sequence, hoping that the antiquated technology would prove an advantage against Volkov's modern jamming equipment. As the system hummed to life, Emma prepared to transmit an emergency message to Regional Command. If they could get air support and quick reaction forces en route, they might yet prevent Shadow Point from becoming a massacre. Before she could transmit, movement below the water tower caught her attention. A team of 4 operators moving with precise coordination, sweeping the area with professional thoroughness. They weren't headed toward the command center with the main assault force. They were searching methodically, quadrant by quadrant, as though hunting for something specific. Or someone specific. Emma abandoned the transmission, temporarily shifting to observation mode. The search team moved with a precision that confirmed her suspicion. These weren't simply mercenaries hired for an assault. These were hunters specifically tasked with locating high-value targets. Their pattern suggested they had intelligence about her possible locations or habits. They checked areas where she routinely conducted her security assessments, places where she had established caches or observation posts. This level of specific knowledge indicated long-term surveillance far more detailed than she had anticipated. One of the hunters spoke into a communications device, then pointed directly toward the water tower. All 4 immediately changed direction, moving with purpose toward her position. Emma quickly transmitted a brief emergency code to Regional Command, not waiting to confirm receipt. Then she gathered her equipment and prepared to move. The hunters had identified her location, which meant her primary mission now was to draw them away from the main base facilities and personnel. If Volkov wanted Blackbird, she would ensure he focused on her rather than the innocent support staff caught in his revenge operation. Emma checked her weapons one final time, then began her descent down the far side of the water tower, away from the approaching hunters. The game had changed. No longer defending a fixed position, she was now the primary target, using herself as bait to pull enemy resources away from Shadow Point's personnel. It was a dangerous gambit, but one that played to her strengths as a former Blackbird operative. As she reached the ground and moved into the shadows between buildings, Emma activated her radio. "Wilson Reyes, be advised. Primary target confirmed as Blackbird. I'm drawing specialized hunter teams away from the command center. Continue with Phase 2 and 3 as planned." Reyes's voice came back immediately. "Negative. Maintain your position. We need your rifle on overwatch." "Not an option," Emma responded, moving steadily away from base personnel concentrations. "Volkov wants me. As long as I'm near our people, they're in maximum danger. I'm creating distance and drawing his specialized teams away from non-combatants." Wilson's voice cut in, the old sergeant immediately grasping her strategy. "She's right, Reyes. This gives us an opportunity to reduce pressure on the command center. I'll coordinate with Reed to exploit the opening." Emma continued her strategic withdrawal, using terrain and structure to mask her movement while ensuring the hunter teams maintained visual contact just often enough to continue pursuit. It was a calculated risk, drawing specialized operators after her while trusting Wilson and Reyes to protect Shadow Point's personnel. As she moved into this darkness beyond the base's perimeter lighting, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. For 3 years, she had hidden from her past, bearing Blackbird beneath the identity of a simple military cook. Now circumstances had forced her back into the role she had abandoned after Damascus. The weight of the sniper rifle across her back felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, like returning to a home long abandoned. Behind her, Shadow Point continued to echo with the sounds of combat as the main assault force engaged the base's defenders. Ahead lay the open desert where specialized hunter teams pursued a ghost they had spent years tracking. Emma moved with purpose into the darkness, drawing Volkov's vengeance away from the innocent, while preparing for the confrontation that had been inevitable since Damascus. The cook had become a weapon once more, not by choice, but by necessity. Blackbird was flying again, not for country or mission, but for the protection of people who had become her reluctant family over 3 years of shared meals and quiet service. People who had never suspected that the woman who fed them each morning was trained to be one of America's deadliest operators. As Emma disappeared into the desert night, the hunter teams followed with grim determination, unaware that in pursuing Blackbird, they were being drawn precisely where she wanted them, away from Shadow Point, away from innocent personnel, into terrain where a single sniper with intimate knowledge of the landscape held every advantage. The hunters believed they were closing in on their prey. They didn't realize that Blackbird had merely exchanged one hunting ground for another, one where the only casualties would be those who had chosen to follow Volkov's orders, not the support staff and security personnel caught in his web of revenge. Emma found her predetermined position a natural depression, offering concealment while providing clear fields of fire across 300 meters of approach terrain. She settled the rifle into position, muscle memory taking over as she established her firing platform with mechanical precision. Through her scope, she counted the hunter teams spreading out to encircle her position. 8 operators total, moving with the confidence of men who believed they had cornered their target. Emma controlled her breathing, the techniques from her Blackbird training returning as naturally as if she had never left the program. The first shot would reveal her precise location. Every shot after that would be a race against their converging approach. Emma centered her crosshairs on the lead hunter, calculating wind and elevation automatically as her finger took up the first pressure on the trigger. In the moment before she fired, Emma thought of the boy in the Damascus window, of his father Mikhail Volkov, who had survived her mission and spent years planning this moment, of the innocent personnel at Shadow Point who would die if she failed to draw the hunters fully away from the base. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, its report echoing across the desert night. The lead hunter dropped without a sound, and the desert erupted into a symphony of violence as Blackbird engaged the forces sent to capture her. Shadow Point's fate now rested on a former cook's ability to eliminate the specialized forces hunting her before they could return to support the main assault. Emma settled into the familiar rhythm of acquisition firing and repositioning, her movements flowing with the practiced precision of an operator returned to her element. In that moment, Staff Sergeant Emma Coleman ceased to exist. Only Blackbird remained a ghost from America's darkest operations, fighting to protect the people who had never suspected her true identity. Fighting to atone for a mission that had created the very enemy, now threatening everything she had come to value in her new life. Dawn broke over Shadow Point in shades of crimson and gold, the Arizona desert sky painted with the colors of violence that had raged throughout the night. Smoke rose from three separate buildings within the base perimeter, black plumes against the morning light. The command center remained under siege, Captain Reed's defensive force reduced but still holding against repeated assault waves. The armory had fallen 2 hours earlier, its protective detail overwhelmed by superior numbers and positioning. The communications hub burned, destroyed by precision charges after its intelligence value had been extracted. Emma Coleman watched this unfold from her position 500 yards beyond the base perimeter. Her desert camouflage, improvised from kitchen linens and local soil, had kept her concealed during 6 hours of cat and mouse combat with Volkov's hunter teams. 7 of the 8 specialized operators sent to capture her lay motionless across the desert floor, eliminated with the surgical precision that had once made Blackbird legendary among America's covert programs. The 8th hunter, wounded but alive, had retreated toward the base 30 minutes earlier, presumably to report his team's failure and request reinforcements. Emma used this respite to assess Shadow Point's situation through her rifle scope. The tactical picture had deteriorated significantly. Base security forces were contained, communications with outside support remained severed, and the attackers had established complete control of the perimeter. Only the command center continued to organize resistance, a fact that spoke to Captain Reed's unexpected competence under pressure. Emma shifted her scope toward the helipad, where 3 unmarked transport helicopters had landed during the night. These weren't military aircraft, but civilian models modified for tactical operations, the kind favored by private military contractors operating without official sanction. Their presence confirmed her assessment. This wasn't a terrorist attack, but a professional military operation funded and organized by someone with extensive resources. Movement near the central helicopter caught her attention. A figure emerged, tall and commanding, his bearing unmistakable, despite the years since she had last observed him through a rifle scope. Mikhail Volkov. The ghost stood in the morning light, surveying the base he had successfully infiltrated. Even at this distance, Emma could see the cold calculation in his posture, the patient satisfaction of a man whose years of planning were finally bearing fruit. Her crosshairs centered automatically on his chest muscle memory, taking over as her finger found the familiar pressure point on her trigger. A shot at this range against a stationary target represented no challenge to an operator of her caliber. One gentle squeeze, and Volkov's vendetta would end his body falling before he even heard the report of her rifle. Emma held position, controlling her breathing as she had been trained, but her finger remained motionless beside the trigger guard. The tactical calculation was simple. Eliminating Volkov might throw his operation into disarray, potentially creating an opportunity for Shadow Point's defenders. Yet something held her back, a hesitation born not from fear but from memory. The boy in the Damascus window. Volkov's son, whose life she had deliberately spared even while completing her mission to eliminate his father. A father who had, against all intelligence assessments, survived her shot and dedicated years to hunting those responsible. A father seeking the same vengeance that had driven so many cycles of violence Emma had witnessed across multiple combat zones. Through her scope, she watched as Wilson was led toward Volkov, hands bound behind him, the old sergeant walking with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. Even captured, he maintained the bearing of a career soldier, back straight and eyes forward. Choosing again, Blackbird. The voice came from behind her, quiet but unmistakable. Emma rolled instantly, bringing her sidearm to bear on the figure standing 20 yards away, partially concealed by a rocky outcropping. Lieutenant Carlos Reyes held his empty hands visible, his expression unreadable in the morning shadows. "You're supposed to be coordinating the defense," Emma said, keeping her weapon trained on him while calculating escape routes. "Defense is contained," Reyes replied calmly. "Command center will fall within the hour. I needed to find you before Volkov sends his second hunter team." Emma noted the specificity of his intelligence. "How do you know about a second team?" "Because I called for it," Reyes answered, his voice steady. I've been working with Volkov for 14 months, since we identified your location at Shadow Point. The betrayal struck harder than Emma had expected. She had maintained professional distance from the SEAL team, limiting personal connections precisely to avoid such vulnerabilities. Yet Reyes's admission still felt like a physical blow. You compromised your own team, she stated, the full implication becoming clear. You fed them into Volkov's trap. I secured their capture, not their execution, Reyes corrected. This was never about Team 315. It was always about you, Blackbird, about completing unfinished business from Damascus. Emma maintained her aim, mind racing through options that diminished with each passing second. Why are you here instead of with your employer? Because I need you to understand the situation clearly before you make your next move, Reyes said, taking a careful step forward. Volkov has Wilson. He has Reed and 17 other base personnel alive. Their continued survival depends entirely on your next decision. Surrender in exchange for their lives, Emma concluded. A classic hostage negotiation. Reyes nodded. Volkov doesn't want a massacre. He wants justice for his son, the boy you orphaned in Damascus. The boy I deliberately avoided killing, Emma corrected. I adjusted my shot to ensure Volkov fell away from him, not toward him. Intelligence said Volkov had no family. They were wrong. This revelation seemed to surprise Reyes momentarily, but he recovered quickly. Regardless, Volkov believes you killed his son that day. The psychological trauma, the loss of his father, the boy took his own life 2 years later. Volkov holds you responsible for both deaths. The information landed with crushing weight. Emma had spared the child physically only to destroy him emotionally. Her mission, her shot, her decision had led to the same outcome through a more circuitous route. What guarantee do I have that he'll spare the hostages if I surrender? She asked, though she already knew the answer. None, Reyes admitted, but I can promise they all die if you don't. Volkov has rigged the command center with enough explosives to leave nothing but a crater. One call from him and everyone inside disappears. Emma studied Reyes carefully, searching for deception in his posture and expression. Finding none, she faced the same impossible choice that had defined her career: sacrifice herself for the mission or live with the consequences of inaction. In Damascus, she had chosen the mission, taking the shot despite the presence of an innocent. The consequences of that decision had rippled outward, creating the very crisis she now faced. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Take me to him, Emma decided, lowering her weapon slowly, but I keep my sidearm until I see the hostages alive. Reyes nodded agreement. That's acceptable. Volkov wants to face Blackbird, not Emma Coleman. He'll appreciate the professional courtesy. As they began the walk back towards Shadow Point, Emma felt a strange calm descend. For 3 years, she had hidden from her past, pretending the skills and decisions of Blackbird belonged to someone else. Now returning to her true identity felt less like surrender and more like recognition of an essential truth: she had never stopped being Blackbird. She had merely channeled those capabilities differently, becoming the silent guardian of Shadow Point rather than America's deniable assassin. Wilson had recognized this truth from the beginning. Perhaps that explained his willingness to protect her secret while helping her maintain the skills she claimed to have abandoned. He had understood something she had not, that stepping back from combat didn't change who she was at her core. The morning sun climbed higher as they approached the base perimeter, its heat already beginning to shimmer off the desert floor. Emma calculated angles and distances, automatically identifying potential cover and fields of fire, her mind processing tactical information despite her apparent surrender. If an opportunity presented itself, she remained ready to act. He'll want to talk, Reyes said quietly as they walked. To understand why you were chosen for Damascus, why his family was targeted. There was no family targeting, Emma replied. Intelligence said he was alone. The mission parameters were clear: eliminate a terrorist financier operating outside international law. No collateral damage authorized or expected. Intelligence was wrong. Intelligence is always wrong in some detail. Emma observed the bitterness of experience evident in her voice. That's the reality operators face in the field. We make decisions based on incomplete or incorrect information, then live with the consequences, while the intelligence officers move on to their next assessment. Reyes glanced at her, professional curiosity momentarily overriding his role as captor. Is that why you became a cook? The consequences became too heavy. Emma considered the question as they walked. I became a cook because it was the opposite of what I had been. No life or death decisions, no collateral damage, just feeding people who needed nourishment, creating rather than destroying. They reached the outer perimeter of Shadow Point, passing through the defensive positions now manned by Volkov's mercenaries. These men watched Emma with professional respect tinged with caution, their body language revealing awareness of her capabilities. 7 of their specialized hunters dead in the desert had established her reputation among them. Emma noted their equipment and positioning with professional assessment. Former military from multiple nations, primarily Eastern European and Central Asian, equipped with a mixture of Russian and Western weapons. Not ideologues, but professionals, the kind who followed orders without personal investment in the mission objective. This observation provided useful context. They would fight effectively, but not fanatically, prioritizing survival over mission completion if the situation deteriorated. Volkov waited at the center of the base, standing before the command center entrance, with the calm assurance of a man who held every advantage. Seeing him fully for the first time without a scope between them, Emma recognized the changes years had carved into his features. The hardness in his eyes had deepened into something beyond mere cruelty, a focused hatred that had sustained him through decades of patient planning. Wilson knelt nearby, hands bound, face bruised, but consciousness intact. Their eyes met briefly as Emma approached the old sergeant, communicating silent support despite his vulnerable position. Blackbird, Volkov said, his accent still present but softened by years of international operation. Finally, we meet as equals, without your scope or my ignorance between us. Emma stopped 10 paces from him, maintaining the distance Reyes had indicated. We were never equals, Volkov. Intelligence said you were a terrorist financier. They didn't mention you were KGB. They didn't mention your son. A flicker of surprise crossed Volkov's features. Yet you took the shot regardless. I adjusted the shot, Emma corrected, deliberately ensured you would fall backward away from him. I tried to spare him while completing my mission. This revelation seemed to catch Volkov off guard. He studied her with renewed intensity, searching for deception. You expect me to believe an American assassin showed such consideration when your country's policy was explicit elimination of targets regardless of circumstance? Believe what you want, Emma replied. Operators make their own decisions in the field regardless of policy. I chose to attempt both eliminate you while sparing your son. Intelligence failed to identify him. I failed to confirm your elimination. We all failed that day. Volkov's expression hardened again. Indeed, and my son paid the price for that cascade of failures. 2 years of trauma and nightmares before he ended his suffering. The psychological wounds proved more fatal than any bullet could have been. Emma felt the weight of this knowledge anew. Her attempt to spare the boy physically had still resulted in his destruction. The cold calculation of her Blackbird training had not accounted for the psychological damage of witnessing his father's apparent death. I cannot undo what happened, she acknowledged, but the others here had no involvement in Damascus. They're innocent of any action against your family. There are no innocents in war, Volkov countered, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who had justified his actions through years of rehearsal. Your country disavowed the Damascus operation, abandoned you and the others involved, yet continued sending operators like you into sovereign nations to eliminate targets without declaration of war or international sanction. Those who support such operations even indirectly share responsibility for their outcomes. Emma recognized the rationalization pattern. She had heard similar justifications from commanders authorizing morally questionable operations, from intelligence officers dismissing collateral damage as unavoidable. The human mind constructed elaborate frameworks to distribute responsibility rather than face the weight of direct accountability. What do you want, Volkov? She asked directly, seeing no value in prolonged philosophical debate. What any father wants, he answered simply, justice. Justice or vengeance? Is there a meaningful difference when the system offers neither? Volkov countered. Your government denied the operation. My government collapsed before any investigation could occur. What mechanism for justice existed? Before Emma could respond, the ground shook with a powerful explosion from the eastern perimeter. Smoke billowed skyward as automatic weapons fire erupted, the distinctive sound of American M4 carbines contrasting with the AK pattern rifles carried by Volkov's mercenaries. Volkov's radio crackled with urgent reports in Russian, his expression darkening as he received confirmation of what Emma had already surmised: reinforcements had arrived, likely a quick reaction force from the nearest military installation. The tactical situation was shifting rapidly. "It seems our conversation must be abbreviated," Volkov stated, drawing a sidearm and aiming it at Wilson's head. "A pity. I had hoped for more understanding before the end." Emma tensed, calculating angles and probabilities. Her own sidearm remained holstered, useless at this distance against Volkov's readied weapon. Any movement toward it would result in Wilson's immediate execution. "Your justice dies with him," she said quickly. "Kill him, and you're just another murderer, not a father seeking closure." Volkov hesitated, his weapon unwavering, but his eyes revealing internal conflict. "What alternative would you suggest? Blackbird surrender to American authorities who will deny any knowledge of the Damascus operation, accept imprisonment, while those who authorize the mission continue their comfortable lives." Another explosion rocked the base perimeter closer this time. The quick reaction force was making progress against the mercenaries, many of whom had expected a simple execution mission rather than sustained combat against American military reinforcements. In that moment of distraction, Wilson moved with speed that belied his age, rolling sideways and creating momentary confusion. Emma drew and fired in one fluid motion, her bullet striking Volkov's weapon rather than the man himself, sending the pistol spinning from his grasp. Chaos erupted as mercenaries responded to the perceived assassination attempt, firing toward Emma's position. She dove for cover, dragging Wilson with her behind a concrete barrier as rounds impacted around them. "Thought you might need a distraction," Wilson gasped as Emma used her combat knife to cut his restraints. "Your timing could use work," she replied, returning suppressive fire to keep the mercenaries at distance. "QRF breaking through, Rangers from Fort Huachuca," Wilson confirmed. "Reed got a message out through the old backup system before they breached the command center." Emma assessed their situation rapidly. They had temporary cover, but were isolated from both the command center and potential reinforcements. Volkov had disappeared in the confusion, likely retreating toward his helicopters for extraction. The mercenaries were caught between defending against the Rangers' advance and pursuing their primary objective of capturing or killing Blackbird. "We need to reach the command center," Emma decided. "Help Reed organize the defense until reinforcements break through." Wilson checked the weapon Emma had passed him, his movements efficient despite his injuries. "What about Volkov?" "Secondary objective," she replied, prioritizing with cold professionalism. "Personnel safety first, then target neutralization if opportunity presents." They moved with coordinated precision, using Shadow Point's architecture for cover as they advanced toward the command center. Emma led, her combat instincts fully engaged, identifying and eliminating threats with the efficiency that had once made Blackbird legendary among covert operators. Wilson followed, covering their rear and communicating tactical updates through equipment borrowed from a fallen mercenary. 3 buildings from the command center, they encountered unexpected resistance. Lieutenant Reyes emerged from a side corridor, weapon raised but not immediately firing. "Stand down, Coleman," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of his SEAL training. "Volkov's preparing to level the command center. Everyone inside dies unless you surrender immediately." Emma assessed his position and stance, recognizing both his tactical advantage and the tension in his bearing. "You're not a true believer, Reyes. You're a professional following orders, same as I was in Damascus. The difference is, I'm still protecting Americans. What are you protecting?" Uncertainty flickered across Reyes' features. His weapon remained steady, but his eyes revealed the internal conflict of a soldier caught between mission and moral compass. "Volkov promised no unnecessary casualties," he stated, though his tone suggested growing doubt. "This was supposed to be about justice for his son, not a massacre." "And you believed him," Emma replied, not as accusation, but as recognition of a familiar rationalization. "We all tell ourselves the necessary lies to justify following orders, Reyes. I told myself the Damascus mission was about stopping terrorism. You told yourself this was about specific justice. We were both wrong." Another explosion rocked the base closer to the command center this time. Wilson tensed beside her, ready to move if an opportunity presented. "The Rangers will break through within minutes," Emma continued, maintaining eye contact with Reyes. "When they do, everyone associated with this attack becomes an enemy combatant, subject to immediate neutralization. You're still American military. There's still a line you haven't crossed. Reyes's weapon lowered fractionally, his professional discipline warring with emerging doubt. What line is that? Allowing American personnel to gain when you could prevent it, Emma answered simply. Everything before this moment can be classified, buried in the same files that hide Damascus and 100 other operations. But what happens in the next few minutes determines whether you're remembered as a traitor or a patriot who helped stop a massacre. The weight of the choice was evident in Reyes's posture. His weapon lowered further as he processed the situation with the tactical clarity that had made him an effective SEAL operator. Command Center Northeast Corner, he said, finally decision made. Volkov placed charges himself. Timer set for 3 minutes started when the Rangers breached the outer perimeter. Emma calculated rapidly. Not enough time to evacuate. But enough to disarm if you know the system, Reyes countered, holstering his weapon and moving toward them. Russian military demolition package modified but standard configuration. I can disarm it. Wilson glanced at Emma, silently questioning whether to trust Reyes's conversion. She gave a minimal nod, the decision made not from trust, but tactical necessity. Even if Reyes was attempting deception, they needed his knowledge of the explosive placement. Together, the three operators moved toward the command center, Emma leading with Wilson and Reyes following in tactical formation. They encountered minimal resistance, the mercenaries now fully engaged with the advancing Rangers and focused on securing extraction routes rather than interior control. They reached the command center's exterior with 90 seconds remaining on Volkov's detonation timer. The reinforced door showed signs of repeated assault attempts, its security protocols having withstood hours of determined attack. Emergency override, Reyes said, moving to the control panel and entering a command code. Volkov extracted it from base security personnel during initial interrogation. The heavy door released with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the command center's interior. Captain Reed and 16 personnel remained inside, some wounded, but all alive, their expressions shifting from fear to hope as they recognized Wilson and Emma entering with weapons ready. Building is rigged to blow, Emma announced without preamble. Reyes knows the system. Everyone moved to the southeast corridor immediately. Reed hesitated only momentarily before ordering his people to move. Years of military discipline overrode questions about why a cook was issuing tactical commands with the authority of a combat operator. Reyes moved directly to the northeast corner, locating the demolition package hidden behind a communications panel. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, identifying the detonator configuration and disarming protocols. Standard Soviet pattern with digital upgrade, he commented as he worked. Dead man's switch connected to remote detonator. Volkov can still trigger it manually if the timer fails. Emma positioned herself to cover the entrance while Wilson helped evacuate the wounded, her mind tracking multiple tactical considerations simultaneously. The Rangers' advance continued, their gunfire growing closer as they systematically cleared the base. Volkov would be seen approaching his extraction point, likely monitoring the command center situation and prepared to detonate remotely if his timer failed. 60 seconds. Reyes reported his focus entirely on the explosive package. Primary detonator disconnected, working on secondary and remote trigger. Emma made a rapid decision. Complete the disarm. Wilson, get everyone clear. I'm going after Volkov. Before either man could object, she moved out, transitioning from defensive to hunting mode with the fluid adaptability that had made her an exceptional operator. The mission parameters had clarified in her mind. Volkov, with remote detonator capability, represented an immediate threat to Shadow Point personnel. Neutralizing that threat took priority over all other considerations. Emma moved through the base with predatory focus, tracking Volkov's most likely route toward the helipad, where his extraction vehicles waited. The sounds of combat had shifted the Rangers now, controlling approximately 60% of the base perimeter and advancing steadily against diminishing resistance. She reached the administrative building overlooking the helipad, taking a covered position with clear sight lines to the 3 helicopters. Volkov stood beside the lead aircraft, surrounded by 4 security personnel, his attention divided between the approaching Ranger elements and a handheld device Emma immediately recognized as a remote detonator. The range exceeded practical pistol accuracy. Emma needed a rifle for the shot, but retrieving her sniper weapon from the desert position was impossible within the time constraints. She scanned the immediate area, identifying a fallen mercenary 30 meters to her right. his Dragunov sniper rifle still clutched in lifeless hands. Moving with silent efficiency, Emma retrieved the weapon, checking its action and ammunition with practiced hands. The Dragunov represented old technology, a contemporary of her Blackbird training rather than modern precision systems. Its wooden stock and analog sights felt oddly appropriate for confronting a ghost from the Cold War era. She established a shooting position with clear line of sight to Volkov, calculating windage and elevation automatically as her breathing slowed to the rhythmic pattern of a trained sniper. Through the scope, she observed Volkov's thumb hovering near the detonator trigger, his attention focused on the command center building where his explosives remained armed despite Rhea's efforts. The ethical calculation clarified in Emma's mind. Volkov with active detonator represented imminent threat to 18 American personnel. The rules of engagement in such situations authorized immediate lethal force regardless of capture preferences. Her crosshairs centered on Volkov's chest, the most reliable target zone. Her finger took up first pressure on the trigger, muscle memory engaging as her mind completed final ballistic calculations. At this range, with this weapon against a stationary target, success probability exceeded 90%. In the moment before she fired, Emma felt a strange symmetry closing. Damascus had begun this cycle of violence, a mission based on flawed intelligence and impossible choices. Now, years later, the consequences of that mission had followed her to Shadow Point, endangering people who had no connection to her covert past. The Dragunov bucked against her shoulder as she squeezed the trigger, its report echoing across the base. Through her scope, she watched Volkov fall, the detonator dropping from suddenly lifeless fingers. His security personnel scattered seeking cover rather than retrieving their fallen employer. Within moments, Ranger elements reached the helipad perimeter, securing the area and the personnel within it. Emma lowered the rifle, a complex mixture of emotions washing through her as the immediate tactical situation resolved. The mission was complete. Volkov neutralized Shadow Point personnel, secured reinforcements established. Yet the cost had been significant. Base defenses compromised intelligence, potentially exposed, and the quiet life she had built for herself irrevocably altered. She made her way back toward the command center where Wilson and Reed had established a coordination point for the Rangers now securing the base. Medical evacuation helicopters approached from the east, their distinctive profiles promising relief for the wounded. Volkov, Wilson asked as she approached. Neutralized. Emma confirmed the professional terminology, creating emotional distance from the act itself. Remote detonator secured. Wilson nodded acceptance, then indicated Captain Reed, who was watching Emma with newfound awareness and respect. Captain has questions about how his cook became the most effective defender of Shadow Point overnight, Wilson explained with dry understatement. Emma met Reed's gaze directly. Classified answers to most of them, sir. Operational security still applies. Reed studied her for a long moment before responding. Whatever you were before Shadow Point Coleman, today you saved American lives. That's the only part that matters in my report. His acceptance, however qualified, represented a bridge between Emma's compartmentalized identities. For 3 years, she had maintained absolute separation between Emma Coleman, the cook, and Blackbird, the operator. Now those identities had merged under the pressure of necessity, revealing capabilities she had hidden even from herself. As medical personnel treated the wounded and Rangers secured the base perimeter, Emma found a quiet moment to process what had occurred. Shadow Point would rebuild. The attack would be classified details restricted to those with appropriate clearance. Volkov's organization would disintegrate without his driving vendetta to sustain it. But the most significant change lay within Emma herself. For 3 years, she had believed she could leave Blackbird behind, burying those skills and instincts beneath the mundane routines of kitchen work. The events of the past 24 hours had proven otherwise. She had not stopped being an operator by changing her assignment. She had merely redirected those capabilities toward different objectives. Debriefing began 3 hours after the Rangers secured Shadow Point. Military intelligence officers established a temporary command post in the undamaged section of the base, processing captured mercenaries and documenting the attack with clinical efficiency. Emma found herself isolated in a secure interview room, facing 2 senior officers from Pentagon Special Activities Division. Staff Sergeant Coleman, the senior officer, began consulting a file with security classifications Emma hadn't seen since her Blackbird days. "Or should I address you as Blackbird?" "Coleman is sufficient, sir," she replied, maintaining the professional discipline ingrained through years of covert operations. Blackbird was a program designation, not a personal identity. The officer studied her with calculated assessment. A program officially deactivated after Damascus. A program whose operators were either reassigned or eliminated in subsequent years. A program with no surviving participants. Until today. Emma recognized the implied question. I received honorable discharge following operational complications in Damascus. My reassignment to support services was approved through appropriate channels. Approved by commanders who believed you would maintain complete operational security regarding Blackbird activities, the officer countered. Yet today you engaged in combat operations that revealed specialized capabilities to multiple witnesses. I engaged to protect American personnel under imminent threat, Emma corrected. Operational security remains secondary to preservation of life. The second officer, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. The question, Staff Sergeant, is what happens next. Your cover identity has been compromised. Your specialized capabilities witnessed by individuals without appropriate clearance. Your connection to a classified operation now potentially exposed to foreign intelligence through captured mercenaries. Emma understood the subtext immediately. Her existence represented a security breach, a living connection to an operation the government had officially denied. In the cold calculation of intelligence work, such breaches were typically resolved through permanent means. I have maintained operational security for 3 years, she stated calmly. I will continue to do so in whatever assignment follows this incident. The senior officer exchanged glances with his colleague before continuing. That assumes there is a following assignment, Staff Sergeant. The Pentagon's preference would be comprehensive resolution of all Blackbird connections. The threat remained implicit but clear. Emma had anticipated this response from the moment she had drawn her weapon during the attack. Intelligence agencies preferred their deniable assets to remain truly deniable, either through death or deep cover isolation. Before she could respond, the door opened. Master Sergeant Wilson entered, followed by a gray-haired man in civilian clothes, whose bearing immediately identified him as military, despite his lack of uniform. The senior officers stood immediately, their posture shifting to respectful attention. General Taylor, the senior officer acknowledged, we weren't informed you were on site. Rapidly evolving situation, Colonel. Taylor replied, his tone pleasant but carrying unmistakable authority. I'll be assuming oversight of the Coleman debrief effective immediately. The intelligence officers departed without further comment, leaving Emma alone with Wilson and General Taylor. The general took a seat across from her, studying her with thoughtful assessment rather than the clinical calculation of the intelligence officers. Staff Sergeant Emma Coleman, he began conversationally, 3 years as a mess hall supervisor at Shadow Point, exemplary service record, and before that one of Blackbird's most effective operators presumed dead after Damascus. Emma maintained neutral expression. Sir, you've created a unique situation, Coleman, one that requires creative resolution rather than standard protocols. Taylor glanced at Wilson, who nodded slight encouragement. Master Sergeant Wilson has been quite vocal regarding your actions during the attack. His recommendation carries significant weight given his own operational history. Emma remained silent, recognizing that this conversation represented a decision point beyond her control. General Taylor continued after a momentary pause. The traditional response would be to eliminate all connections to Blackbird, either through termination or permanent disappearance into deep cover identity. Neither option seems appropriate given your demonstrated loyalty and effectiveness. What alternative does that leave, sir? Emma asked, professional discipline masking the tension she felt. A third option, Taylor replied, one that acknowledges reality rather than attempting to bury it. Wilson tells me you maintained your operational capabilities while serving in a support role. That combination of skill sets suggests an opportunity. Wilson spoke for the first time. The general is proposing a new program, Emma, one that places operators like you in support positions at key facilities, creating an additional security layer invisible to potential hostile elements. The concept crystallized in Emma's mind immediately. Operators hiding in plain sight, maintaining cover identities and support roles, while providing emergency response capabilities beyond standard security forces. The same role she had inadvertently filled at Shadow Point during Volkov's attack. The Sentinel Initiative, Taylor explained, personnel with advanced operational capabilities placed in non-combat roles throughout critical infrastructure. Visible, yet invisible. Present, but unrecognized until needed. And I would be the prototype, Emma concluded, grasping the implications. You've already proven the concept works, Wilson noted. 3 years maintaining cover while preserving operational readiness. Immediate effectiveness when threats materialized. Protection of personnel and facilities without compromising broader operational security. Taylor leaned forward, his expression serious. This represents an alternative to traditional disposal of compromised assets, Coleman. An opportunity to continue serving while acknowledging your unique situation. The alternative remains permanent resolution of the Blackbird connection. The choice wasn't really a choice. Emma recognized the offer for what it was, this only path forward that didn't end with her disappearance or death. Yet the concept itself held genuine merit beyond merely preserving her existence. Parameters, sir, she asked, transitioning mentally from potential target to operational planner. Taylor seemed pleased by her professional response. Initial phase would establish 3 to 5 sentinels at critical facilities under your guidance and Wilson's oversight. Cover identities and support services, maintenance or administrative roles. Regular skill maintenance through disguised training protocols. Activation only under extreme circumstances similar to Shadowpoint. Emma considered the proposal with tactical assessment. Selection criteria for personnel. Former special operations with proven discipline and compartmentalization abilities. Wilson answered. Individuals who can maintain cover identities indefinitely while preserving operational capabilities. Psychological stability paramount given the unique stresses of long-term cover maintenance. The concept expanded in Emma's mind, tactical applications and potential vulnerabilities revealing themselves through professional analysis. This represented a genuine innovation in facility protection, leveraging psychological blindness toward support personnel to create an invisible security layer. I accept the assignment, sir, she stated formally. Taylor nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. You'll maintain your current cover identity, but transfer to a new facility after Shadowpoint's reconstruction. Wilson will coordinate your transition and assist with the developing training protocols for additional sentinels. As Taylor departed, Emma found herself alone with Wilson, the old sergeant's expression revealing quiet pride in her decision. You knew this was coming, she observed. You've been advocating for this program already. Wilson shrugged slightly. Recognized the potential when you arrived at Shadowpoint. Been suggesting similar capabilities to Taylor for months. Your performance during the attack simply provided the necessary demonstration. Emma processed this information with newfound appreciation for Wilson's foresight. While she had been focused on escaping her past, he had been developing a framework that would allow her to integrate it productively. Thank you, she said simply. Wilson acknowledged with a nod. Next assignment will be more structured. Clear protocols for capability maintenance, regular assessment, defined activation parameters. But the core remains the same. Hide in plain sight until needed. Blackbird becomes Sentinel, Emma mused, the symmetry appealing to her sense of order. One identity officially ended, another beginning with similar purpose but different methodology. With one critical difference, Wilson noted, Blackbird operated alone without support structure or extraction protocols. Sentinel operates with backup, with team awareness, with institutional protection. The skills remain, but the isolation ends. This distinction resonated deeply with Emma. Her experiences in Damascus had been defined by abandonment, by operational disavowal that left her exposed and alone. The Sentinel concept offered similar service opportunity without the devastating isolation that had broken so many covert operators. I can work with that, she acknowledged, feeling a weight lifting that she hadn't fully recognized until its absence. 2 days after the attack, Shadowpoint began its recovery process. Military construction teams assessed structural damage, while intelligence units completed evidence collection and documentation. The official narrative classified the attack as a terrorist incident with connections to international arms trafficking, details restricted to those with appropriate clearance levels. Emma found Commander Michael Harrison in the temporary medical facility established on base, his right arm bandaged and face bearing the evidence of recent combat. His eyes tracked her entrance, recognition and reassessment evident in his expression. Staff Sergeant Coleman, He greeted her, formally acknowledging her military status for the first time. Or do you prefer another designation now? Emma took the seat beside his bed. Coleman is fine, Commander. How's the team? Alive, Harrison answered, gratitude evident beneath his professional tone. Captured during initial contact with Volkov's forces, but not executed as expected. Found in a secure facility 10 miles from the objective, bound but unharmed. Reyes Harrison's expression darkened. In custody, pending full investigation. His involvement with Volkov appears extensive, though his actions during the base attack suggest late-stage reconsideration of his position. Emma nodded, unsurprised by this assessment. Reyes had made choices that crossed professional boundaries, yet his ultimate actions had helped save lives at Shadow Point. The military justice system would determine appropriate consequences. You knew about Volkov, Harrison stated rather than asked. When I mentioned the mission, you recognized the name immediately. Yes, Emma admitted the time for deception passed. I encountered him during a previous operation, one that created the vendetta leading to Shadow Point. Harrison studied her with the calculating assessment of a veteran operator. Blackbird, the name the first attacker called you. Some kind of special program. Classified beyond your clearance level, Commander. Emma replied automatically, then softened her response. But yes, a program that officially never existed, conducting operations officially never authorized. Damascus was one such operation. With Volkov as target, Harrison concluded, which explains his focus on Shadow Point after discovering your presence here. Emma confirmed with a nod. His son was collateral damage, psychological rather than physical, but devastating nonetheless. The attack on Shadow Point represented the culmination of years seeking vengeance for that loss. Harrison absorbed this information with the pragmatic acceptance of a career officer familiar with operational complexities and unintended consequences. And now your cover identity is compromised, your capabilities witnessed by dozens of personnel without appropriate clearance. Now I transition to a new assignment, Emma explained, under modified protocols that acknowledge those capabilities while maintaining necessary operational security. Understanding dawned in Harrison's expression. The mess hall supervisor who saved a military base from professional mercenaries. Not a cover that failed, but a prototype for a new security concept. Emma appreciated his quick comprehension. Something like that. Personnel with advanced capabilities placed in support positions invisible until needed. Harrison considered this with tactical assessment, hiding in plain sight, using psychological blindness towards support staff as operational coverage. Effective based on recent evidence. That's the theory being developed, Emma acknowledged. A comfortable silence fell between them, two professionals recognizing the elegant simplicity of the concept. After a moment, Harrison spoke again, his tone more personal than professional. 3 years you served breakfast every morning, maintained perfect cover while observing and protecting, never once indicated your true capabilities or background. That was the assignment, Emma replied simply. Disappear completely, become someone else without reservation. Yet when the moment came, you transitioned instantly back to operator status, Harrison noted with professional appreciation. No hesitation, no performance degradation, despite years away from active operations. Emma considered this observation thoughtfully. I maintained certain practices privately. Wilson helped once he recognized my background, but the transition wasn't as seamless as it appeared. Could have fooled me, Harrison remarked with genuine respect. You functioned at elite operator level against specialized hunters with years of planning advantage. Saved the base, protected personnel, neutralized primary threat. Textbook performance under extreme circumstances. The praise coming from a commander of Harrison's caliber carried unexpected weight. For 3 years, Emma had defined herself by what she no longer was, by the operator identity she had ostensibly abandoned. Harrison's assessment suggested a different perspective. She had never stopped being that operator, merely redirected those capabilities toward different objectives. What will you tell the team? Emma asked, curious how Harrison would explain her transformation from cook to combat operator. The truth within classification constraints, he replied, that Shadow Point had additional security assets embedded in support roles, that those assets activated as designed when conventional defenses were compromised. The specific details remain classified, but the concept itself represents valuable tactical awareness for operators who might encounter similar arrangements at other facilities. Emma nodded appreciation for this approach. It acknowledged reality while preserving necessary operational security, treating team members as professionals capable of understanding security constraints without requiring complete transparency. Before you transfer, Harrison added, I'd appreciate your insights on improving base security protocols. Your perspective from both sides of the operational spectrum could identify vulnerabilities traditional assessment might miss. I'll prepare a detailed assessment, Emma agreed, recognizing the professional courtesy in his request. Not treating her as the cook who had stepped beyond her role, but as the specialized operator whose unique position provided valuable insights. As she left the medical facility, Emma encountered Wilson waiting outside, his weathered face showing signs of the recent combat, but his posture still carrying military discipline despite retirement status. Saying your goodbyes, he asked as they walked together across the base. Establishing professional closure, Emma corrected. Different than personal goodbyes. Wilson nodded understanding. Taylor wants us at Fort Benning next week. Begin developing training protocols and selection criteria for additional sentinels. Emma considered this timeline, mentally shifting from field operator to program developer. The transition represented yet another evolution in her professional journey, from direct action specialist to covert operative to support role cover to program architect. Who would you recommend as our first candidates? Wilson asked as they reached the temporary mess facility, the familiar environment now viewed through entirely different context. Emma considered the question with professional assessment. Former special operations with demonstrated adaptability and compartmentalization capabilities. Psychological stability, paramount. Individuals who can maintain cover identities indefinitely without performance degradation or emotional compromise. Sounds familiar, Wilson observed with slight humor. Described yourself pretty accurately there. Emma acknowledged this with a small smile. The difference being I fell into this role through circumstance rather than design. Future Sentinels will enter with full awareness and preparation. They entered the mess hall, the space transformed from combat zone back to functional dining facility through the efficient efforts of military reconstruction teams. Emma surveyed the room with tactical awareness, permanently engaged, identifying defensive positions, fields of fire evacuation routes. The habits of an operator never truly disappeared, merely integrated into everyday consciousness. Will you miss it? Wilson asked, noticing her assessment of the space. The simplicity of being just a cook. Emma considered the question carefully. I was never just a cook, even when I believed I was. The operational awareness never disappeared, just redirected toward different objectives. Food service rather than target elimination. Nutrition rather than intelligence gathering. And now I acknowledge what I've always been, Emma replied with newfound clarity. An operator who found a different way to serve. The Sentinel program simply formalizes what I've been doing instinctively since Damascus. Wilson nodded approval, the mentor recognizing the student's progression. From Blackbird to Sentinel, from isolation to integration, progress by any professional assessment. As they continued discussing operational details for the program's development, Emma felt a sense of resolution that had eluded her since Damascus. For 3 years, she had attempted to escape her past by denying her essential nature, pretending the operator capabilities and instincts belonged to someone else entirely. The attack on Shadowpoint had forced recognition of an essential truth: she had never stopped being that operator. The skills, the awareness, the calculated decision-making had remained intact beneath the surface identity she had adopted. What changed was not her capabilities, but her purpose, shifting from elimination to protection, from destruction to preservation. Blackbird had operated alone without support structure or extraction protocols, the isolation eventually breaking her connection to purpose and identity. Sentinel would operate differently, acknowledging both the capabilities and the human requirements for sustainable performance. Integration rather than isolation, support rather than abandonment, purpose aligned with protection rather than elimination. Emma Coleman, once known as Blackbird, now prototype for Sentinel, had found her resolution not by escaping her past, but by transforming it into something new. The cook had become a weapon when necessary, then evolved into something more complex, a guardian capable of both nurturing and defending, of feeding bodies and preserving lives. As Shadowpoint began its reconstruction, Emma prepared for her next evolution, not abandoning her past, but integrating it into a future where her unique capabilities serve protective rather than destructive purposes, where the skills forged in darkness found application in preservation rather than elimination. The Sentinel program would formalize this approach, creating an invisible security layer throughout critical infrastructure. Personnel hiding in plain sight, visible yet unseen until the moment their specialized capabilities became necessary. A legacy born from the shadows of Damascus, transformed through the crucible of Shadowpoint, now directed toward protection rather than vengeance. In that transformation, Emma found the purpose that had eluded her for 3 years, not in denying what she had been, but in redirecting those capabilities toward preservation of the values and people she had originally sworn to protect. The journey from Blackbird to Sentinel represented not escape, but evolution, not denial, but integration. The cook who became a weapon had found her true identity, the guardian who protected guardians, the invisible sentinel standing watch over those who never suspected her true capabilities, until the moment those capabilities became their only hope for survival.